So we are ready to start talking about how to nest and trace our patterns onto fabric. I have all of my patterns for the tote bag cut out. So I have my facing here, I have my lining here, and then I have my shell underneath. Everything is cut out and I have all of my notches notched. I want to show you when you are lining up your pattern. I talked about it briefly during the patterning phase of this project that the facing and the lining should equal the shell. So these two should complete the whole, as you can think about it. So if I stack these on top, they should be the same width. All of our pieces should be 18 inches wide, or whatever you determine the width of your pattern is. When I line up the facing, if I go edge to edge, they're going to go above and beyond that shell. What I want to line up is the stitch line on the facing with the stitch line on the lining pattern. When I put those together, and my notches will line up there and there, so you can check your pattern. They are in perfect alignment with the shell of the pattern. So that's a way to double check your work, kind of like old math problems, making sure that all of the pieces are in perfect alignment before we get started. So when I begin tracing, I am making my tote bag out of muslin. I have a lot of it on hand. It's a really inexpensive cloth. I don't want to use any of my pricier materials. But I'm ready to go ahead and get started. So you can start with any pieces. I would recommend you kind of like lay out your fabric when it's pressed. If you are making it out of muslin, you should also block your fabric. Mine is already blocked here. But you should lay out your pattern in an arrangement that makes the most sense with the yardage of your fabric. Some people might have 45-inch wide fabric. Some people might have 60-inch wide fabric. So it's important to really like utilize the amount of material that you have, and also take into account any potential mistakes that you might make that you might need extra for. When we line up a pattern, we always want to align our pattern's grain line with the grain of the fabric. So my selvage has been removed, but my directional arrow should be running here. And I want to make sure that when I'm lining up my fabric, it is really running parallel to these vertical fibers at the top and bottom. That's why my grain line extends all the way through. And I do not notch my grain line. I want that intact because I want to be able to like lean up close and see that it is running absolutely parallel to the fabric. I want to avoid skewing my pattern where it looks like this. And if I continue that line, it'll actually intersect with those fibers. So I want to make sure we're on a perfect track, in perfect alignment with my fibers and my grain line. Because our tote bag is not being worn and we're not really concerned about stretch, if your pattern works great on the cross grain, you can absolutely cut your pattern on the cross grain as long as the grain line is in perfect alignment with the horizontal running fibers. Okay, so that's definitely an option. Maybe you like the print of your fabric running that way. Maybe it makes sense based on the yardage. It'll help conserve a little fabric. It's totally up to you, but it's absolutely fine since this is not a garment being worn. That would really affect the amount of stretch in a woven garment. So I am ready to start tracing. I'm just going to check my grain line again, make sure that it looks good on the top and bottom. I'm giving myself a little margin around my pattern, okay? And then I'm going to weight it down. So I have a pattern weight here. One is plenty sufficient. I'll still use my non-dominant hand to kind of go around and smooth out my pattern as I trace. I am tracing with a pin just for demo purposes, okay? So I want everybody to be able to see when I remove my pattern. And I'll start here at my center, top of the pattern, and really work my way around, and also making sure I get into the notches so that I can see where my seam allowance is on this transferred pattern. I'm starting out with the lining, just so I can stack the facing for demo purposes as well, just like we did when we were patterning. But you can start with any of your pattern pieces. You will need 2 of each. So again, it's something to kind of plot out and be mindful of when you have a fabric that you maybe ordered or enjoy or want to use up. Definitely measure twice, cut once, that old adage, it's always true. So very smoothly dragging my pencil next to the pattern. You'll see me kind of run over it a bunch of times, but that's because I'm trying to get as close to the edge of my material or my pattern piece as possible. Okay. So when that's done, I can remember that this is my lining. Of course, they're all different sizes, so that's going to help us identifying it when we remove it. But what I should see, I'll mark there, is my notches on my pattern indicating I am sewing at a 1/2 inch in on each of those lines. Okay, perfect. So I'll get to tracing my facing piece. And just like our paper pattern, I'm going to stack our facing. I already know that my grain line is in alignment if these lines touch, right? I already know it's balanced. You can think of a level if you're hanging like a painting or a piece of art in your home. Okay, so it's weighted down. I'm going to begin the same process again. So really working. Oops, I got away from it. That's how that happens. So really working my way around these pattern pieces, getting into the notches. Just like so. Okay, so when I've done that, I can remove my pattern. Okay, that looks great. I did eliminate, right? So now, because our seam allowance is included on our production pattern, you'll know it's a production pattern and we have notches and seam allowance included. I only have one line here, so this is going to become my cut line, right? My stitch line is embedded into the pattern, so I don't see it. I just have my one cut line. There's a few options for cutting your pattern out after everything is traced. One is scissors, which I will happily demo, and the other is a rotary cutter. Which I truly thought I had mine more handy than it is. I have no idea where it's at. News to me. So a rotary cutter is a little bit more of an investment. It's great for a project like this. These are really easy lines to work around. They're perfectly straight lines. A rotary is maybe not so great for really tight curves that wheel doesn't really want to go around it. But anything kind of straight like this is wonderful. Also, slippery fabrics are wonderful with the rotary because you weight down your material and then you can go around it, and it's much easier than cutting with traditional scissors. So when we do get into cutting our pattern, I'm going to do the exact same thing that I did with my paper. I am weighting down the fabric with my left hand. I'm keeping the material, and I'm actually keeping my scissor blade on the table and the material. I'm not holding anything in the air. When you start to move things around and hold it in the air, you'll get some really jagged, inconsistent cutting edges. So again, working really slow through this material, making sure that I am cutting directly on that line. If you cut outside of it, you are adding extra seam allowance and you will eventually have pattern pieces that do not line up. So really gently kind of cutting. I'm not going to cut that line yet because I am going to continue tracing and stacking my patterns. But essentially, I'm just cutting with the scissor blade on the table or cutting mat, whatever your surface is, and making my way around it. So I'm going to continue tracing my patterns and isolating it until I have 2 facings, 2 linings, 2 shells, and 4 straps total. Okay, I'll see you when it's time to get sewing.